This is entitled Moral Lessons from the Raven, Nevermore. And let me start out by quoting one line from the famous Edgar Allan Poe poem entitled The Raven. "Prophet," said I, "thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil." So if any one of you think that Edgar Allan Poe was the first one to analyze the moral characters of the raven, you were only off by about 5,000 years. Because in Midrash Rabbah, in Parshat Bereishis, we're already talking about the raven. Why? Well, we mentioned last time that Cain had murdered his brother Hevel. So this was the first murder in human history, but it was also the first time that a body had to be buried. And how would the father of Hevel know what to do? Adam and Chava. They were very, very distraught, and they didn't know what to do with the body. So along came the raven, according to another collection of Midrash called Pirkei Rabbi Elazar. And the raven came with a compatriot who had just died. He purposely came in front of Adam, dug a hole, and buried the other raven. And Adam saw this and he said, that's what I should do. So it was a tremendous act of chesed, a tremendous act of loving kindness that the raven did. And the Midrash goes on to say that the raven was actually rewarded for this great act of kindness. How so? So now we're going to get into kind of the complex moral compass of the raven. It seems that the ravens are black, and when their offspring are just born, they always come out white. And because of that, and perhaps you could say it's a case of mistaken identity, but the ravens do not feed their offspring because they look at it and say, that's not from us, must be somebody else. They don't recognize the white little birds, so they abandon them. But because they did this great act of chesed, and they showed Adam how to bury his son Hevel, so they are rewarded with God himself takes care of nourishing these little baby ravens until the baby ravens are on their own and can take care of themselves. So there you see this interesting mix of generosity and cruelty. But the Midrash goes even further and says that the ravens do something else amazingly magnanimous. When the ravens pray for rain, they pray for the whole world. And there's a verse in Tehillim that says that the whole world gets rain because of the prayer of the ravens. So now emerges a very interesting picture of these ravens and what, the degree of chesed that they carry out on a daily basis. But let's talk about two other places that the ravens appear in Tanakh. The first one, of course, is the story of Noah. Noah tries to send out the raven to see if the waters have receded after the flood. But according to the Midrash and the Talmud, the raven refuses to go on this mission. The raven thinks that it's a mission impossible. It's a suicide mission to go out there and face the elements. And the raven also adds a very unusual suspicion. He says to Noah, I bet the reason that you want to send me away is because you want to have relations with my mate. And that's not only quite bizarre, but in fact, we also know from the Talmud that the ravens were one of three on the ark that had relations, even though Noah had asked that nobody have relations on the ark while the world was suffering such destruction, and that no one should have relations, and the ravens did have relations. So here, for the raven to turn around and accuse Noah of wanting to have relations with its mate, obviously made Noah angry. And Noah said, "Who needs you? What are you good for? We don't use you in sacrifices. There are bird sacrifices, but never a raven. And you're not a kosher bird. We can't eat you. So what good are you?" Here we come to the next cameo appearance of the raven, because God came and said to Noah, "Don't be so harsh on the raven. Take the raven back. The raven is going to do yet another great act of chesed," and that is when the great prophet Eliyahu was running for his life, the raven brought him food. And it's interesting that the commentators there say that the reason that the raven was chosen was because it was sending a message to Eliyahu. You have to remember in the story that the Jewish people were doing terrible sins, not keeping the Torah, and Eliyahu got upset at them, and he asked God that there be no rain at all, a complete drought. And this went on for a long time, and the people were suffering greatly, and God wanted Eliyahu to have compassion and to pray to end the drought. And so he sent this raven to say, "Look, these ravens, they don't have the greatest reputation. Sometimes they show some cruelty to their offspring, as I mentioned, but even they do tremendous acts of chesed. You too should do an act of chesed and end the drought." Okay, so let's step back. We've talked a lot about the ravens and their emotions and their complexity of being somewhat cruel and somewhat amazingly generous and acts of chesed. What's the message that we're supposed to get out of it? So I see the first hint comes from a commentary on the prophets named the Radak. And the Radak says that the raven, the way God treats the raven babies by taking care of them, is actually a metaphor for the relationship between God and the Jewish people. In other words, it's when the Jewish people are exiled and at a low point in their history and powerless and helpless, God will take care of us, just like God takes care of those helpless raven when they're just born and the parents abandon them. So now that we've sort of opened up this possibility of making a connection between the ravens and the relationship with God and the Jewish people's relationship with God, so I would like to take that one step further. After all, chesed is a very big idea in Judaism. Olam chesed yibaneh, the world is built on chesed. Moshe Rabbeinu is quoted in the Talmud as saying that the Jewish people have three characteristics. That we are, let me quote, "Shlosha simanim yesh be'uma zu, harachmanim, baishanim, gomlei chasadim." They are merciful, they are bashful, and they do acts of chesed. So all of a sudden you see something that we have in common with the ravens, that we do these acts of chesed. So what I'd like to try to tie it all up and say that the ravens are a mixed bag. They're arrogant, they're rebellious, they make accusations, they follow their natural instincts and can't control themselves. These perhaps are also characteristics of the Jewish people. If you look at the different sins that we've done listed in the Chumash and in Navi, we are also rebellious, and in many ways we are also acting on our emotions, and we are not so much in control, and we also have tremendous arrogance sometimes to God. So we have characteristics that we share with the ravens. I'd like to propose that just like the ravens have a tremendous saving grace, really beyond all imagination, that they not only came and showed the first grieving parent in the history of the world to bury his child, but they also pray for the sustenance of the entire world, not just praying for themselves. We too, the Jewish people, have tremendous acts of chesed that we do, and it is very much part of a fundamental part of our faith and part of the Torah and part of what God expects of us. So I would say that both the Jewish people and the Ravens are given special dispensation because of the chesed we do, that God can overlook other characteristics that perhaps are not as attractive. Have a great Shabbos.